thank you all for being here, but more importantly, thank you for all of the contributions to the work. I'm going to try to stand next to this microphone so I don't fade in and out. So let's start with Manda. Manda, when we started this work group, it was called Calculating Restaurant Technology ROI. Why did we change the name of this tool?
Well, I think it started out really complicated because we tried to throw a lot of things into the tool. So we were talking about not just ROI and payback, but we were also talking about MPV. We were looking at how do we incorporate hurdle rates? What about depreciation? What about tax rates? I mean, it got pretty complicated pretty fast. And what we found as a group, and with the help of our brand representatives in the work group, we realized that they needed something really simple. And so the Payback Comparison Tool is rooted in simplicity. And the reason why we chose that is that it's just a really quick, easy way that a lot of people can understand on how to compare technologies that maybe you're thinking about putting into your restaurants.
Good. That's a good succinct way to explain it. And Robert, let's move towards like just the all-encompassing idea of standardization and why this tool was important in particular to include in a standardized group of resources for the industry.
So I recall early on in the work group, as a vendor or a solution provider, I talked about how we can take the data and make it look and do whatever we want, to the advantage of our solution being a fabulous solution. We're going to save you lots of money and we're going to make you tons of revenue. And in my career, I've seen so many different models. So with all of the work efforts we've done, the goal is to standardize these so that we all use the same tool. And that really was the goal here, was a very simple standard tool that everyone could use. Every solution provider could pre-populate their data in it. The brands could also use it and understand it so that it was truly apples to apples and there wasn't any manipulation of the data or stretches of truth within the data.
Right. So it's basically, like you say, a single pane of glass for looking at apples to apples when you're, and we'll show you what the tool can do. You're going to see a live demo, and you're also going to be able to access the tool immediately after the conclusion of this session. But from an operator's perspective, Rob, tell us what you currently use or what you did use before you got your hands on this to do a payback comparison of solutions that you're evaluating and how this is different for you.
Right. It would depend a lot on the scenario. We'd have various spreadsheets. It lacked consistency, and this is what's really nice about this is it makes it all consistent. You could do what if scenarios. There's levers you can pull. There's a lot of great flexibility in that you could really see what different outcomes are based on different scenarios. And prior to that, it was just manual developing spreadsheets and with incomplete stories, incomplete pictures. And you'll see this tool here in a few minutes. You'll see the flexibility it gives you. And by the way, Robert and I provided all, some advice, some input, but Manda here did all the heavy lifting. What a fabulous job she did with creating this.
I concur.
And calling it a spreadsheet is a disservice. It is a great tool that you'll get to see yourself in a few minutes.
I concur. You did a ton of work on this, Manda. So we are at the slide. I know that you guys don't have unfortunately, we don't have like a confidence monitor in front of us to show you, but we're on the comparing vendors demo video. So Manda, tell us like what we're about to see and then cue us on the video when you're ready.
Okay, so I'm just going to kind of set up what you're about to see in this first use case. So as Rob and Robert mentioned, the spreadsheet is set up very easy to follow. So you're going to have two tabs that are totally devoted to inputs, and you're going to have two tabs that are, it's going, but it's not supposed to be going.
Yeah.
And two tabs that you're going to have that are going to be totally devoted to outputs.
Can we restart the video, please, from the beginning so she can walk through the demo properly? Thank you.
Can you give me just a few minutes before we walk?
Give her just a few minutes. Yeah, whenever you cue, that's when we play. Thank you so much back there.
And so we kind of built it so that you can see clearly inputs and outputs. And then we have what we mentioned before, the scenarios. So these scenarios for the inputs will allow you to kind of quickly toggle through the different scenarios to see how it's going to affect your output or your payback, also known as your break-even point. Another thing to note is that, there's lots of different ways that you can use these scenarios. I'm going to show you 3 different use cases here in a little bit. But once you start using it, you'll start to think of other ways that maybe you can use these scenarios to compare either vendors or technologies or rollouts, things like that. So when you look at the scenarios, you're going to have a couple of different options, right? It's going to be scenarios for your brand attribute inputs. In this first demo, those are all going to be the same because we're going to pretend like we have 100 stores in our enterprise, and we're going to roll this technology out to all 100 stores. In addition, you'll see scenarios for the rollouts. So in this case, you're going to see a base rollout and then a faster rollout and then potentially a slower rollout and how that affects your payback. And then we also have the benefits, right? So vendors usually tell you, hey, I can save you this much in cost, or I can increase your sales by X amount. We're going to add scenarios into that as well so that you can see, this is what the vendor told me, but what if it's a little better than that, or what if it's a little worse? I don't even know if you see better when what the vendor is going to tell you, but you're given that option for the scenarios. So we can cue the video now. So we're going to start out on the first input tab, which is the brand attributes inputs. And this is where you're going to just input some basic information about your average sales and average cost on a monthly basis. You're also going to see areas where you can look at definitions. So when you hover over those cells, you can read the definitions. And there's also an area where you can see those definitions on the last tab. There is a glossary. You can add a few notes as to why you were putting those types of numbers in there, and then you'll switch over now to the project inputs. Again, you can add notes, and this is where you're going to put your project cost. So vendor A is going to give you all the cost of implementing this technology within your store. You're also going to have options for kind of a corporate level cost that's not necessarily attributed to a store, but would be recognized at the corporate level. And then you'll have scenarios for your rollouts, like I mentioned. You can do a base rollout, a faster rollout, and a slower rollout, and you just want to make sure that whatever number you had on that first tab is going to translate to your rollout as well. So you don't want to have 200 stores in your rollout when you really only have 100 stores in your enterprise. And then you scroll over to the benefits, and you'll see that you have 3 options for benefits. Usually you can do a base case, a better case, and a worst case, and that's what I show here. And then you can add a few notes into the box. And this is your results tab. So this is the deployment view. It's going to take all of the inputs and put them over here on the left. You have your toggling between your different scenarios that you want to look at. And then once you decide what you want to do, which in this case I have it at base case, you can scroll down, make sure everything has come over the way it's properly supposed to. And then to the right, you're going to see kind of a month-by-month depiction of that rollout and the deployment and undeployed stores kind of added up compared to that base case, right? That was in your attributes tab. What would your store look like if you didn't implement this project? It's going to subtract the deployed and undeployed stores. It'll give you a net benefit at the bottom. And that's going to encompass everything that was over there on the left. So we'll let it run for a little bit until it gets to the net benefits there at the bottom. And you can see month by month what everything's looking like from a project view. So you have your net benefits, your total benefits, and then eventually we're going to subtract out the cost that we have input into the project cost area. And then you get net benefits. You add those up to cumulative benefits. It's just addition and subtraction for payback, right? And then you got to figure out where did you hit your break-even point, and that's going to be the graph here. And I think it says 35 months for vendor A. And then the second tab is going to take all of this and kind of roll it up into an annual view. Again, this is just showing you can toggle between the scenarios. Then you can scroll back over to the right and see how that changed your payback. This one's going to bring up an error, I think, right? So if it all goes to hell, you're not going to get your payback within 3 months, basically, is what this is telling you. It looks like we changed a couple of different scenarios. It's 23 months or something like that. But I kind of go through and toggle between the scenarios to see what happens. If you do get that error, it says NA. That means you may not be hitting payback within the term that you chose on the Inputs tab. And that's okay. You either change the term to see, make it a little longer. So we do have 2 to 5 years within that term period. Or you have to go back and say, look, if this happens, there's a chance that it may be too risky for me to invest in this particular project. That's the NA there. So this is the results tab that you just saw with the NA. We're gonna put it all the way back to base case, then go back to that view. And it's at 35 months now. This is a really easy screenshotable or portion of the sheet. So you can just take it and pop it into a PowerPoint slide. And in this PowerPoint slide, I've already done vendor B. So I think the vendor B has maybe a 12-month payback period based on their cost and the different scenarios that we put in for them. And so you can stop the video now.
Yeah, I think it's stopped.
Okay. And so what that could help tell you, right, and inform you is, look, if I choose vendor B for this particular technology, I may get a faster payback. Therefore, it could be a little bit less risky for me to invest in vendor B. And it could also kind of fit into whatever other projects that I may have going on, and you can kind of see how that also impacts your business.
I just want to stop really quickly, Amanda. Are there any questions about this particular view? Anybody have any wild questions about that particular view? Because we're going to go into another demo video that shows you a different way to use the tool now. I just thought I'd leave it open. No? Everybody's good? Are you wowed sufficiently? There's a question in the back.
I think this is a great tool for restaurants and vendors to both use. I was curious if somebody wanted to add in like another revenue generator field or another cost. Is there the ability to do that, or would you just kind of substitute those numbers into one of those existing fields?
So we did leave some room where you could add other things in. You will have to go and kind of add that into the formula, but it's pretty easy where you see where to add it. You would just be, we have an other category if you want to add it in there, but if you need something other than that, you would just kind of add that cell into the other formulas.
We
Thanks for the
encourage
question.
tinkering. We want you to go in there and make it your own.
Yep.
And if ever you run into problems, you can just throw it away, download a fresh copy, and start over again.
Yep. Great question. All right, we're going to dive into the second demo.
Yeah,
Amanda,
can you just stop? Don't dive into it quite yet.
I know. I'm just getting to the right screen.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
So this, I'm just going to cue it up a little bit. So now we've chosen vendor B, and you have 100 stores, right? But those 100 stores may not all operate at the same level. Some may have more sales per month than others. Some may have more costs per month than others. And so you've chosen vendor B, but you want to understand, like, what is that payback going to be for those different tiers of stores? And this might help you decide what you're going to roll out first and what you're going to roll out last, because you really want those benefits generating tiers to actually be maybe the first ones that you implement. So this is going to be comparing store tiers. And the important thing to note in this particular use case is that you're going to have to toggle that comparing store tiers cell to yes. Because what this is going to do is it's going to take out the corporate level costs that I mentioned before. Because you don't want to apply all of those corporate level costs to just a subset of your stores. This is going to mess up the payback. So we just decided that if that says yes, those don't carry over into the deployment view. All right, we can roll this video now. So now you can see that these scenarios are actually by tier, and you're going to want each scenario to be the same throughout. So for tier 1, you're going to have the top row there as tier 1 for scenario 1. And then when you get to the other store attributes, you want those to be consistent too. And then you can add some more notes about it as well. Then you're going to go to the next tab, And similar to this, your rollout scenarios are also going to have to match up to those tier scenarios that you put in the brand attributes tab, because you don't want too many stores showing up in the rollout that aren't necessarily attributed to that tier. So you're just going to make sure that it all adds up and it makes sense. And then your benefits are also going to be able, you're going to be able to toggle between scenarios for that. You don't have to have them stay tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You can still do the base case, better or worse case if you'd like for that. You're going to add your notes. And then we're going to go over to the project inputs. Oh, and then we're going to, my bad, this is deployment view. So then this is going to take and transfer over all of your different inputs. You can toggle between the tiers, and then you can scroll over to the right and see everything that you saw before, except now this is tier dependent. And you can see here that this has maybe a 9-month payback time. Then you can go up and look at the second tier after you take a screenshot of that and keep it. And I've already done tier 2 and tier 3. And so tier 2, I think, gives you about a 6-month payback. And tier 3 is a little bit more, maybe, I don't know, 12 months, 30 months, something like that. In that range. It's more than the others. And so now you kind of have a little bit more information about how different store sets might behave with these scenarios and implementation of this technology. Okay.
Any questions about this portion of the tool, comparing the tiers? We can keep rolling then. I just want to say that this is the kind of work RTN's doing. These are the key contributors. Just want to echo that again, that this work is available on our website, and it is free to the industry thanks to the contributions of our members. So we appreciate it so much. Let's move to the third example.
So the third example is going to be you're going to look at a way that you can use it to understand how a project is going, and or how you thought it was going to go and how it's actually going. So this is kind of termed plan versus actual. And what you're going to see here is that I've implemented the project. I'm using vendor B, and I want to see, and I'm looking at maybe month 5, and I'm realizing I'm not deploying as fast as I thought I was going to. So now I can kind of use that second and third scenario to say, if this continues the way it continues, how is that going to impact the payback that I thought I was going to get? And so we can roll this video now too. All right, so again, we're just using all 100 stores, so we don't have to make any changes to those scenarios. For this project's already rolling. We're using vendor B. We have vendor B's cost in there. And now we have where we see the rollout coming down. So this is our base case, and you can see around month 5, right, I'm getting a little slower than what I had expected. And so that second scenario is kind of your way of saying, if we continue on this path, what is that going to mean? And then you can say, well, if I'm able to improve it in month 10 or so, will that help? And so you can actually put that into the scenarios. The vendor B was lying to you. You're not getting 1% increase in sales month to month, right? So now you're saying I'm only getting 0.5, and how is that going to impact my payback period? You go over to the outputs tab. You can toggle again between those different scenarios. So this is like, this is what I'm seeing now. This is what I wish I wasn't seeing, right? So if I continue down this path, what's going to happen, right? So the payback is going to get worse if you put in the actual and forecasted case. It actually is an NA, right? So you're not going to see payback within the three years. So you go in and you say, well, what if I can improve it, right, over the later parts of the months? How is that going to affect my payback? And that gives you kind of goals that you're going to have to hit to make sure that this technology gives you a payback period within your limits. And in this case, we were able to get it back down to 30 months. And that's the end of the demo.
Any questions on the plan versus actual view? All right, let's talk to Rob from an operator's perspective. How do you see this working? I know that we addressed a few of the different scenarios here, but is there another use case that you'd like to highlight?
there's tons. Really, anything that affects your P&L, the store's P&L, whether it's increased sales, like putting in kiosks or digital menu boards, or maybe tightening labor with a new labor management system, or improving waste in the stores with an inventory management system. There's a wide gamut of possibilities where you could use this. Even things like improving speed of service. How is that going to impact? So a lot of careful thought needs to go into this as far as what benefits, because usually the costs are pretty predictable in most cases, but benefits can be a little tricky, which is why I love the best scenario, worst scenario of the benefits, and not just blindly following what your vendor says. Sorry, Robert. So those are just some examples of this could be really useful.
Right. And tell us a little bit, Robert, about the user guide that we created to accompany this, and why that glossary of terms was so critical to the work.
I mean, with a lot of I would say all of the work efforts we've done, there's lively discussion around the nomenclature, what the attributes are, what each of the individual cells, what we call the data that's in it. So when we built the glossary, one was just so we had a common language about how we would define this. Aside from standardizing the payback calculator, we also, as Manda pointed out, we put it in line so you could hover over the cells, but also the last tab does have a complete listing of it. And then the user guide just kind of walks you through how to use it. It's a lengthy read. It's very comprehensive. But at the end of that too, there's always phone a friend. I mean, we're here, and there's lots of RTN resources, volunteers that help build this, and so we're always we're there to assist.
Yep. And so when we think about what the tool is, we've seen lots of what it can do. Let's talk about what it is not. So Rob, why don't we start with you? What does this tool not do?
I think it's important to note that it's here to help us make a decision, right? But you shouldn't, I may be stating the obvious here probably, but you shouldn't drive your decision solely based on that tool, because there's a lot of other factors, right? Vendor reputation, references, terms, what's in the MSA in terms of terms. Are they favorable, non-favorable? SLAs, they provide SLAs. So obviously there's a lot of things to factor in when making a decision on which solution partner to go with. So this is a tool to help you make that decision, but you shouldn't be basing the decision just based on what this tool says.
Yeah. Robert, do you want to expand upon that?
Yeah, I mean, it helps you with one of the components of decision making. What it also doesn't do is there are a lot of intangible environmental issues, such as the weather when you're comparing stores or events or things of that sort. So what we did is we just stripped all of that out so that it's purely a scientific, calculation-driven payback. Because we were asked the question, that's like, well, what if I have a digital sign? How can I have the attribution of a digital sign to sales in that store? And even today, we all can't answer that question. We don't know if someone saw a promotion on the digital sign in a store that increased the sales. There's some of those things that we just can't make 100% connection to. So we decided to leave those out.
Right.
So that it's just, again, we simplified it to the point where it's useful, but that we weren't putting in data that we really had no control over.
Right. Manda, did you want to add anything to that? Just kind of an overarching, what you feel like you didn't want to include, what we didn't need to include based on what these two folks have.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that there's going to be a little bit of groundwork that you have to do before you actually enter the tool, right? You're going to have to know what your average sales per store is, right? You're going to have to know what that looks like from a monthly perspective. And then you're also going to, we don't have kind of anything in there that helps you calculate labor cost or anything like that, right? You're going to have to kind of do all of that groundwork first. And then once you have that, that's when you just insert it into the tool.
I think, Rob, I remember you saying something that really struck me when we were in the work group, and you were saying, I don't have to go find all the attributes, I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you want to do this, right? This is kind of a good reference for that.
Exactly. I remember, days whenever we were looking at new systems, new technology, what have you. And by the way, this doesn't have to be technology dependent. It could be a new standard of operations in the kitchen. So it doesn't have to be technology-based solution. But it felt like, okay, now how do I calculate ROI? How do I calculate payback? What are all the inputs? It felt like I have to, like you said, reinvent the wheel every time. And going to a library now where I could pull this up, it's going to save me a lot of work.
Right. It's kind of like what we saw with the AI speaker today. Like ChatGPT does some of the work for you. This is your ChatGPT payback comparison tool crew that has done the work for you almost and sort of gathered all of the necessary components and built all the formulas so smartly into this tool so that you have at least a starting point. It's not going to have everything. As you mentioned, Manda, you got to have a lot of information going in, but at least it gives you something to start with and play around with, which I think is important. Do we have any other questions from the audience? If not, I'm going to put somebody on the spot, being Tim Tang, because he was he was in this work group. So I'd love to know from Tim Tang and also from Sandy Angel in the audience, who is with our partner AHLA/HTNG, about just the process of this work group. Oh, sorry, microphone, I'm too close.
Sure. So I would just describe it as this is a great opportunity or example of suppliers and restaurateurs kind of coming together and sharing their collective knowledge. Suppliers get to see and have the opportunity of working across multiple restaurant brands and seeing various use cases of how technology is being applied, what works and doesn't work. Restaurateurs bring their deep knowledge of their business into this tool. And so you get the best of both worlds. You get the deep dive of a restaurateur's understanding and exact experience of their brands, as well as a supplier's kind of more portfolio view of the industry at large and kind of what works where and like.
Great. Sandy, I don't know if you want to say it. I know you have been in the trenches with us since the beginning. Sandy helps us execute the work group. So tell us what kind of key takeaway you had from working with this group from day one on this work.
Sure. So first of all, I'd just like to say thanks to all of the team members because they're so much fun to work with. As Robert always says, you can't go home and talk to your spouse or your significant other about a lot of this stuff. So you can get together in these work groups and really geek out, which is super fun. And the work groups are made to be very flexible. So as you heard, we started off calling this an ROI calculator. And as we got into a lot of the deep conversations, we decided to kind of take a little different turn based on the needs of those in the group. We have a very successful model that we use for the work groups, making sure we get all the right folks involved and have some really, passionate conversations around these topics. So, I'd just like to say, if you're an RTN member and you haven't been involved in the work groups, come geek out with us.
And there is a QR code in here that does have a sign up for the work groups, but I just want to go through a couple of other tools that we have available in case you haven't really done any deep dive into the resources that RTN has on its website. This buyer's guide and RFB best practices for point of sale kind of fit nicely, dovetailed into this tool. I mean, if you're looking at evaluating solutions, this is a really nice reference for a checklist and best practices when you're going through pilots and labs and sandboxes. And I mean, just from selecting the vendor to even deciding whether you need an RFP or an RFI. So that's a really good reference tool. We also have the restaurant technology KPIs. I know that Tim Tang, this is near and dear to your heart. You led a lot of this work. This is another great tool that lets you really look at some ways that the industry has defined the KPIs and how to calculate them so that we're all on the same page. I think a lot of this, and Robert, I'm going to ask you to chime in, is about being on the same page.
Always single pane of glass, as Tom Seeker would say.
Yeah. This is the, speaking of that, the Restaurant Technology Capabilities Framework is another one. This is just a way I like to use. Russell from Chipotle says to architecture enterprise, right? From every single aspect of where the technology fits, where you might have gaps in your stack, and we're like looking at maturity models as well for your enterprise. So that's another cool tool. Here is the QR code to join RTN work groups. We invite you to, you'll find this on the website too, but it's just a call to action to join us. We have some cool work groups spinning up in the coming month. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions one more time and then give our panelists a chance to give some final thoughts. Any other questions? You all have this all figured out. You're going to grab that payback comparison tool and have fun with it on the plane on the way home. you can make your own Google copy of the spreadsheet and just play around with it. We encourage you to kind of look at it and give us feedback. If you see something that needed to be included or an oversight, the team would love to hear about that. Well, let's end with some final thoughts. Manda, why don't you give us some final thoughts about the tool and the process?
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate just how fun it was to work with everyone. I don't get to work with a group of people who are just as passionate about spreadsheets as I am. And so it was really awesome to be able to meet with those people and have a lot of fun building something that is useful for the industry and kind of standardizes things. It really is like the sky's the limit with this. So you've got a really good baseline tool here. If you hand it off to your finance teams or your accountants, they can do even more with it because they have now the basis of what they can do to do all of those other things like MPV and IRR and all of those other terms that a lot of us don't really care about, right? So it's a really good baseline tool for that kind of stuff.
I would just add too, it was fun, Manda, to see you take your journey from Excel to Google Sheets, which I have, I've done in a prior, but we will always kind of start in Excel. I think we think in Excel when we talk about spreadsheets, but in order to share it, we bring it to Google Sheets. And I would say most of the functionality is there. Some of it's not. And so through that iteration, through that process, working with you, Manda, was great to be like, all right, because there was some really great stuff that you built, and we had to, unfortunately, it just didn't work inside Google Sheets. But with that said, you can download it in an Excel format. Some of the things may break in it, so you'll have to go and stitch it back together, but then you can take it and run with it and add some really neat things to it. So,
yeah, great. And Rob, we'll give you the last word.
Pressure. Just tons of gratitude to these two and the rest of the team. Great example of putting our minds together, collaborating, really coming up with different scenarios and tweaking and making updates. I think it's a fabulous product. And, at the end of the day, it makes our lives a little bit easier, right? We all have tough jobs and not having to think, okay, how do I put a payback scenario together, and just being able to go to the library here and download it makes our jobs a little easier, and I'm grateful for that.
Yes. I think Zarek said easier, faster, cheaper. So basically you can get an organic, holistic view of when you're comparing apples to apples, what really is the best case scenario moving forward when you're looking at vendor selections. So thank you to my panelists. Thank you everyone who attended.